Welcome to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. This is Chris Miller. I invite you to join me as I interview artists from a variety of disciplines. We'll share powerful stories and lessons learned while making their art. Good day. This is Chris Miller with the Spiritual Artist Podcast. It's a cold day here in Dallas, and I am talking with someone I'm really excited to introduce you to. Michaela Haas, Ph.D., is an award-winning reporter and author of 4 nonfiction books, but we're going to talk about her most recent book. I'm going to hold it up for you on YouTube. Bouncing Forward, The Art and Science of Cultivating Resilience. So it's the art and science of cultivating resilience. Michaela is a contributing editor for David Barron's Reasons to be Cheerful and has been writing for the New York Times, Al Jazeera, Rotary International, the Huffington Post, CBS, and numerous other media. Awards include the Professional Excellence Award 2022-2023 from the Foreign Press Correspondents Association and Club, winner of the ASJA Health Writing 2022, first place environmental reporting, LA Press Club 2020. I will list her website on the bio of this podcast. You can look her up, but as you can see, there's a lot of health-oriented material here. Michaela, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to have you. We talked a while back, and listeners, this is quite the book. It's a good inch deep, and it's full of information. So I'm looking forward to having you kind of tease it out and unpack it for us this morning, Michaela.
You marked it all up, Chris. What spoke to you?
Oh, there's so much. There is so much that spoke to me in this book, and there's so many references to, let me tell you a little background. I wrote my book because I wanted to share my creative story with how I came back to recognizing that there is some sort of a greater power. And so my book, The Spiritual Artist, is about that journey. And I noticed that your book is similar. It's about your own personal journey of walking through something, walking through a challenge.
That's true. Yeah.
So tell me, because listeners, she interviews many people in this book. So Michaela, tell me, what inspired you?
So this book is basically me meeting and speaking with people who had survived trauma. Like Mia Angelou might be familiar to a lot of your listeners, the famous writer and poet and civil rights activist. Bernie Glassman, the late Bernie Glassman, who was a very well-known Buddhist teacher, and many others, some famous, some not famous. And what sparked this was that I became quite ill when I was 26 years old. I'd been traveling the world. I've had a lot of fun going through Asia, traveling by myself, and I got severely ill. And even when I came back, I did not recover. I was bedridden for about 8 months, and doctors didn't know what was wrong. They thought it might be anything from a brain tumor to some weird virus. Nobody knew. So the point is, I had thought of myself as a pretty strong and resilient person. And when I got sick, I realized I really wasn't. I wasn't resilient. I was depressed. I was despondent. People who I thought were my friends weren't there for me. And so I started reading about other people, and I wanted to know, well, how did these people recover from challenges, from traumatic injuries, from traumatic experiences, and not to compare, my pain to someone like Mia Angelou, or I interviewed my friend who survived Auschwitz, and I actually resisted including my story in this book for this reason, because I'm like, I don't belong in this category in one row with these wonderful people. But I wanted to know how did they survive this, and not just survive this, but they seem to have come out of this even stronger and more committed to their ideals. And that's what I wanted to know. And that's why I started this journey. And I asked everybody, what made you stronger and what helped you heal. And that really was what I was after, to learn from them. So sometimes people write books because they are experts. And in this case, I wrote it because I was looking for answers myself.
Well, I love that. And I wanted to ask you, there's a term in here called post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
Is that a term you coined, or is that something you?
No, two psychologists coined it, Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, at the University of Charlotte, North Carolina. So they are psychotherapists, and they have worked for decades with trauma survivors. And they were surprised again and again that their clients told them, I hate that this trauma happened to me. Some of them were veterans or cancer survivors. I hate that this happened. But you know what? I learned something from it. And so after decades of working with people, they found that people reported growth in 5 main areas: personal strength, deeper relationships with others, new perspectives on life, a new appreciation for life, and a changed spirituality. And so they found that people's sense of themselves and their relationships with others and their philosophy of life really changed. And we think of, everybody now is familiar with post-traumatic stress, and they found that post-traumatic growth is very, very common. They found that as many as up to 90% of survivors experience at least one aspect of post-traumatic growth. And I found that really, really, really inspiring, because we often think we're doomed, right? When we're at the bottom, when we can't see a way out, we think, oh, I'll never, ever be happy again. I will never get out of this. And their research really shows that it is possible to survive almost anything, and not just survive it, but to actually learn something from it and grow stronger from it. So this is not, I didn't coin this term, but this is actually based in very real science and life experience.
Well, what I want to share with the listeners, and I should question you first. Sometimes this situation doesn't necessarily mean that it's removed, right? Because do you believe that you're chronically challenged with this issue that you had health-wise?
Yeah, my health has never been the same. I'm not resilient physically, so to speak. I'm still wearing my mask everywhere I go because I cannot get the virus. That hasn't changed, but what has changed is how I view it and how I deal with it. And so that's, to me, the encouraging part, that, post-traumatic growth doesn't mean that there is no stress associated with a challenging experience. But the growth actually comes from working with the stress. It comes from working through the pain. It comes from being open and curious about what's really going on. And, when the pandemic started, I think alcohol consumption went up like 30% or more. And that's just so typical, because whenever we go through something challenging, we want to numb ourselves. We want to grab something, whether it's some alcohol or a cigarette or whatever it is. We don't want to be there for it, right? And unfortunately, the first step of post-traumatic growth, everybody will tell you who's been through something challenging, was to actually be present and honest and really look at what's going on. And so this is not a Pollyanna-ish, something good will come from it kind of pat on the back. It's actually work to grow from it, but it's possible. So that's why I researched this, and that's what attracted me to this whole idea. And not just idea, it's a very real life experience.
Well, I think that's what I wanted so much. What attracted me so much to this book is there are so many people that struggle with ongoing conditions too, ongoing illness, ongoing conditions of their life. Or, for example, even, losing someone that's dear to you. That's not something that's going to be fixable.
Yeah.
But so what you're saying is just being present for it, right?
Being present for it. And the tragedy in our family is my sister-in-law lost her only daughter, Haley, when she was 3 years old, after several open heart surgeries. And so this was a trauma that devastated everybody in the family. but she, she really, really looked hard at how she could heal from that. And what she did is not for everybody, but she joined Compassionate Friends, which is groups of bereaved parents, because she had gone through this experience. And so she was, well equipped to help other parents who have a similar loss. And that's another thing I found again and again, like veterans who came back from war with post-traumatic stress, being there for other veterans, or people who have been chronically ill, finding groups of other people who are going through chronic illness, because in a way, we're all so different, but in a way we're really not, we're the challenges we go through are really very similar. And though everyone's person's journey of grief or loss is different, in a way we do go through similar emotions. And it helps to talk to somebody who's been there and who has found a way forward, and to exchange, ideas, and also just to be there for that person and to listen to them, and to really listen, to really be there for them, open-minded, and hear what they have to say. That's actually the most helpful anybody can do.
So what I'm hearing is the community,
Yes.
finding that community. And that is a blessing from COVID, is that we've realized that that community might not be someone down the street, but you can find someone online. And there are,
anywhere. I mean, and that's another thing that I learned from this research, because I'm a bit of a loner. I like to be by myself. I'm not like the life of the party. And so I always thought resilience meant that, you could do it on your own and you're strong and independent. And I learned that really nobody can do it on their own. That finding support, finding other people who are there for you, and being that person who is there for others, that's really the most crucial part in all of this. And really nobody can do it alone. Mia Angelou told me this, and really everybody I interviewed for the book told me this, is that to find at least one person who we can call at 3 a.m. when the going gets rough, or who is there for us, and also to be there for others. That's at the very core of the path to growing out of challenging experiences.
Well, Michaela, when I read this book, you can tell, I mean, obviously you're a go-getter, right? I mean, I can tell you probably spent your whole life, you saw something, you made a list and you did it, right? And I think it was probably a real big hit for you to suddenly encounter something that just knocked you down.
Yeah. And you can't, I thought, well, snap out of it, get out of bed, you're 26, 27 years old, that's the age where you're supposed to be strong. And I had just traveled the world all by myself, and then to find myself in bed, and sometimes not being able, literally crawling to the bathroom because I had no strength. And it wasn't just me who was kind of in disbelief. It was also the people around me. I had a relationship with a partner who wasn't there for me, because he was also at first, everybody was sympathetic. But then after a few weeks and months, it was like, hey, get your S together. I mean, it's nobody has much sympathy when you're that young and you just can't do anything. So yes, it was really, really challenging, and it changed what I thought of myself. It changed of what I thought of the world. It changed of what I thought of my friends. It changed a lot of things. But the point is, I think, learning from others that this isn't the end of the story, but that there is a way forward. And that to me is really what matters. I think it made me humbler. I think I was quite arrogant before, because I I did a lot of things by myself. So it's not a bad thing to lose that kind of arrogance.
Well, I will share that. You mentioned that in the book, because I think there's a lot of people struggling with ongoing illness, whether chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, there's cancer, all sorts of chronic illnesses. When you say bouncing forward, it's not buckle up and just keep going, right? That's not what, no, it's a different process entirely, right?
It is. It's, resilience literally means bouncing back. That's what the term actually means. And it was actually Mia Angelou who gave me the title for the book. She speaks of bouncing forward, because when we go through something severe, something life challenging, we cannot really bounce back. We're never going to be the same we were before that loss of a loved one, or that loss of health, or that traumatic experience. But we can bounce forward, meaning we have to forge a path forward. And that's not something that happens immediately for most people, or easily, or, as I said before, usually we cannot do it by ourselves. It can be a slow path. It's different for everybody, but to acknowledge that we are different, and to actually take that as a chance. Like Richard Tedeschi, the psychologist who coined that term, post-traumatic growth, he says, when there's this big earthquake and everything is shattered and in ruins, why not build something better? Why build the same structures that we did before that crumbled? Why not build something better? And that's how I like to think about it, that in a way, sometimes the more challenging the experience, sometimes the bigger the growth can be, because we cannot live life as usual. We cannot go around, or about our daily business as usual, and so we're kind of forced to make big changes, and that might not be all bad.
No, I mean, but I do hear what you're saying too. Like for you on this journey, so coming from someone that took charge of your life and had total health, there was, I imagine, a emotional journey. Is that the word I would use for you as you went through this?
Oh yeah, I was very depressed. I was suicidal, because I couldn't see a way out, and that's something I think most people go through when they are really going through something very challenging. And in the moment, you don't see a way out. You don't think things will ever get better. You can't see it. And so that was another thing. I was studying Buddhism at the time. And I thought, I was meditating, and I thought, well, why can't I be more patient? It was like the Buddha talks about, he talks about the second arrow. The first arrow is the actual injury, and then the second arrow is the arrow that we're poking the wound. Is like, why can't I get better, and why can't I be more patient, and why am I not dealing better with this, which is really not helpful at all. But we're all doing it, right? So yeah, that was another thing. I was just shocked about my mental resilience not being there.
Yeah, and there's a stage of just kind of, I don't know, surrendering or accepting what is, right? You have to accept that this is what is here now.
Yeah, I kind of had to. I mean, in the end, we all have to, but it's not pleasant. Let's be honest about that.
It's not. Yeah. And I wanted to share something that you mentioned too, because I read the book, and each chapter you kind of focus on a different person in a different challenging situation. And you're right. There's some paraplegic. There's Auschwitz survivors. There's a lot here, but didn't you say, or maybe perhaps Bernie Glassman says it, that pain is not, it's pain, right? It's pain. And you can't sit there and say, my pain is less than yours or more than yours.
Yeah. I think it was maybe, it might've been Viktor Frankl.
Oh, okay.
Who said that, pain is like a gas that fills any room completely, whether it's a small room or a larger room. And in a way, suffering is like that. Suffering is as big as we experience it. You cannot really look at it from the outside and say, well, the suffering of an Auschwitz survivor is greater than the suffering of a veteran or someone having cancer. It's how we experience it. And even one of the chapters in the book is about veteran Rhonda Cornum. She was shot down with her Black Hawk helicopter in the first Iraq War, and barely survived. She was sexually assaulted, and she was taken prisoner of war. And when she came out, she started a resilience training for the U.S. Army. And even there, I went to the resilience training. I went to the boot camp. People are saying, well, she was only prisoner of war for a week, and she wasn't really tortured,
I don't know. I read the story. It sounded pretty horrific. I think she had no control of her arms, and then she was sexually assaulted.
Both her arms were broken, so she couldn't even defend herself when she was assaulted. But we have that, like, maybe it's an army thing, but I think a lot of people think like, oh, well, her suffering wasn't as big as my own or something like that. We kind of compare suffering as if it was like a temperature we can take. And that's just silly because, suffering is how we experience it. Suffering is as big as we make it, as we experience it to be.
Right. It fills the room. It fills the room.
It fills the room. Yeah. It
And
fills our heart and soul.
I think so. Having empathy and compassion for people, all people,
Yeah.
we don't know where you're coming from. When we meet people, we don't know where they're coming from, what stories they have, what they're experiencing at that moment.
Yeah, I like that saying, be kind. You don't know what the other person is going through. And I often remind myself of that when people are impatient or, in the pandemic, when people get worked up about small things. You never know what's going on at home for them or at work or in their personal life. So let's be kind.
Yeah, it's be kind and be community. I think that I love that you bring that up, that how important it is to find your community and find your support. My father passed away from Alzheimer's, and I think it was very hard on my mother. It's always hard on, but she wouldn't join a community. She wouldn't join a group. She absolutely, I'm going to do it alone. I'm going to do it alone. And there's a level of shame, like she felt like there was a shame that her husband had this. And I think we got to be vulnerable and just go out there, and there's no shame to these situations.
Well, that's another thing that's so often associated with a traumatic experience. I think almost everybody experiences shame. We kind of think that shouldn't happen to us because we're good people and God wouldn't allow that, right? But it does. It does happen to us. It does happen to good people. And I think that shame, that is exactly why community is so important. And I agree, it's easier for some people than for others to go to connect with groups and talk about what one is going through. But I would think, and that's not scientific knowledge, that's just me speaking from my experience and from my research, I think growth starts when we are able to express our feelings. I think that is really a crucial step. And that, you could express it to yourselves at first by maybe writing it down in a diary, or I know, Chris, you're a big fan of morning pages, whatever it is. But at some point I really feel we do need to express it to another person. We do need to find ways to talk about it. I think that is a crucial step in acknowledging it to ourselves and to others, honestly, what really happened. And also, I think we're a little bit further now as a society. You mentioned your mother having some shame about Alzheimer's, or think about or her husband having Alzheimer's, or think about all the survivors of sexual assault. And for so long, victim shaming and survivors thinking they must have done something to provoke this or deserve this. And I really hope we're further along now. Mia Angelou, I keep coming back to her. She was raped when she was 8 years old, and she didn't speak for 5 years. She became mute. She didn't talk because it was such a traumatic experience and because she felt it was her own fault. And that's so often we think that when something terrible happens to us, that it's somehow our fault. And I think, to come out of our shell and express that to others who maybe have gone through something similar is a really big step towards healing.
I definitely agree with you. It's something that we always can find a new layer within ourselves of vulnerability. Being willing to put that out there and share it. I'll tell the listeners, one of the reasons I was attracted to your book is I'm like you. I'm a go-getter, and I've always had a million things going at once. And about a year ago, I developed a very painful skin condition of psoriasis, but very painful. And at first I went through, what am I doing wrong? Like I analyzed my diet, my lifestyle, my stress, whatever. I started looking at all these things. I did all these extreme changes of diet, lost a lot of weight, but it hasn't gone away. And there are things in life, and I'm sure there's lots of people listening to this right now that have certain conditions in life that might never go away. And for me, Michaela, that was so hard. I had always taken, I could fix anything. Right? I could fix it with my little to-do list and determination. And I'm very committed and very organized, but this I cannot fix.
Yeah.
It's
There's
just,
something we cannot fix. But then that's the other thing, we always think we're alone in this, but then when you speak about it openly, you find there is at least one other person in the room who knows exactly what you're talking about. And I really, as I said at the beginning, I really hesitated putting my own story in the book. I felt like I didn't have a place in there. And my publisher kind of really pushed me to do that. And then when I went on book tour, I also, people were asking me about my own story. And I guarantee you, every single time, there were people in the room who said, oh yeah, I've gone through something similar. I can relate to that. I understand. And that experience in itself was rewarding, to connect with people on that level, because as a journalist, I usually write about other people. I don't like to write about myself. I don't like to talk about myself and my story. I like to report other people's story. So that was really challenging for me, but I'm glad I did it. I mean, to admit publicly that I tried to commit suicide was huge for me. But then, you see other people in the audience going, oh yeah, I can relate to that. I've been at that place, or I have a family member who was in that place. And it's the only way forward is to acknowledge that, because I found the one thing that's the most detrimental to post-traumatic growth is trying to gloss over it, is trying to numb it, is trying to pretend it didn't happen, that it isn't there, because it is there. And the more we're trying to ignore it, it will push, at some point it will push its way forward. Like Rick Allen is in the book, the drummer, Def Leppard's drummer. And he, after he lost his arm in a car accident, he went on tour, he partied, he drank, he did really everything to not think about that missing arm and that big wound, until he found himself attacking somebody violently in the bathroom of an airport, and he was court mandated to go to therapy. And so 10 years after the accident, it was the first time that he was forced to look at what was going on underneath. And that's when his real journey to healing began. It wasn't when he took up the drumsticks again and went on tour with his band. It was when he actually had to look at himself and stop drinking and work on his relationships. That's when his path to bounce forward really started.
Yeah, and ideally, what I've found from a creative perspective, because we're all creators, is oftentimes whatever that is actually becomes part of your creative tools, and it builds you.
Yes,
it makes you a better creator.
It does. Yes, that's true. Or even I was just thinking of Coco Schumann, the Auschwitz survivor. He didn't speak about Auschwitz and the Holocaust for 50 years. 50 years he carried that within him. And then one day he was overhearing a talk at the table in a restaurant or in a cafe where younger people talked about, the Holocaust didn't really happen. It was all just a lie. And he got so upset, he confronted them and he said, I was there. I lived through that. And after that, he decided that he had to speak about it. And that's when I wrote his story first for a newspaper. And then later I wrote his biography with his help, because he felt that the time had come for him to speak about what he had not spoken about, even with his wife, by the way, who was also a Holocaust survivor. They had not spoken about this horrific experience that they both had gone through. But it changed him as a person, to open up about that. And he was a musician, also an artist. And it changed the way he made music. It changed the way he played in the band. He was already a very loving and open person, but it made him even warmer and even more accessible, that he started to open up about his own story. So I'm mentioning this is because there's really no timeline, for people. For some, they can open up about that immediately, like Rhonda Cornum did. For some, it takes 10 years, like Rick Allen. For some, it might take 50 years, like Coco Schumann. There is no, there are all these books about the the stages of grief, or the state.
Yeah.
And there's something to it. We all go through similar cycles of emotion, but in the end, it's individual. How long we take with that journey of working through a challenging experience. So in a way, I'm glad that all these books are out there, but in another way, I don't want them to be taken as prescriptive, because I found that it's really a very individual and unique process for everybody.
Right. Right. And, like sometimes we loop, we'll go through one stage, think it's over, and we come back.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think of it as a linear path. I think more like a circle, like we revisit the same places, but with a different, with a bit more perspective, or a different perspective each time. We think about what happened, and every time we look back, our perspective changes a bit. Our perspective of ourselves changes a bit. So yeah, it's I think it's more like a spiral, and ideally an upward spiral. Not
Yeah.
if we have the right tools and support, ideally it's an upward spiral. Yeah.
So I love that phrase. It says, instead of thinking, why did this happen to me, you can change it to, why did this happen for me?
That's good. Yeah.
Getting to that place of what in this experience can it move me forward, bounce me forward, right? So with your own experience, because it sounds like you now realize there's limitations to your body and your life, how has this helped you as a reporter and an author?
I would think that I'm a really empathetic interviewer. And sometimes it even means not publishing a story. One of the most horrific things I had to do when I was a very young reporter, I was like 19 years old, I was still in journalism school, and there had been a horrific house fire, and the paper made me go and knock on doors, and knock on the door of a family who'd lost 2 children in that house fire. And I think that was the most horrible thing I ever had to do as a journalist. And I would refuse to do that now, because I want to honor the people I interview. I don't want to sometimes as journalists, we have to ask the questions that are actually most re-traumatizing for trauma survivors. When exactly did it happen? What exactly happened? Tell me the details. These questions are very, very hard for trauma survivors to answer. And I think sometimes it's better to let that rest. Trauma sensitive reporting means maybe not asking these questions if the interview partner isn't ready for it. And what I do now is I'm a solutions reporter. And what that means is I write about effective, reproducible solutions to society's most pressing and vexing problems, whether that's climate change or health issues or the pandemic or mental health, environment. I love interviewing people who are actually doing something about problems rather than, doing the breaking news. And of course, we need breaking news. But I think very much in addition to writing about the problems we face in the world, we also need journalism that highlights all the good things people are doing, and that highlights, whatever problem you can think of. I guarantee you there's somebody or a community or a city, somebody is already working on that. Somebody is already trying to find a solution, or maybe already has found an effective solution. So let's highlight that. Let's focus on that in addition to writing about how horrible some things are in the world.
Wow, I love that term. What did you say? Solutions reporting?
Solutions journalism, yes. That's what David Byrne's Reasons to be Cheerful is all about. That's why I'm a contributing editor there. And Reasons to be Cheerful, we're not posting kitten videos. It's not it's not that.
It's serious concepts, but
it's real rigorously researched, effective, reproducible solutions. Look for the helpers, right? Fred Rogers said that's kind of what we're doing.
Oh, wow. That is fantastic. So that definitely has bounced you forward. And do you have another book on the horizon?
No, I've written a book during the pandemic, during the lockdown, and I've decided not to publish it for now, kind of for the same reasons we spoke about earlier. It's my own journey. It's a memoir I attempted to write, and I decided to put it in the drawer because I'm not ready, I think, to put that out in the world. It's very personal. It's not flattering, and I think I need to either wait a few years and pick it up again and read it again, or I might never publish it. As a as a journalist, I always think I need to put it out, publish it and put it forward, but maybe I don't. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do with that. So there is no book in the works that's going to be published anytime soon. Let's put it like that.
Oh, there you go. And you'll know, and regarding that book, you'll know when you know. It's
exactly.
It's like a painting. You know when you know it's finished. People say to me, "How do you know it's finished?" I don't know.
No, it's never finished. But also, like Cheryl Strayed, said, the author of Wild, she said it's interesting. There's a right time to write a book. She couldn't have written Wild immediately after she finished the Pacific Crest Trail. And there was a time when it was just the right distance, the right perspective, to write it and then to publish it. So maybe it's like that with the creative process, that you spoke about earlier. There's a time when we feel something has matured to the point of where we can show it to others.
Yeah, it might take 50 years. It just, you don't know, right? There's no time limit. There's no, it just might take 50 years. So I love this conversation. I think it's a wonderful book, and I definitely strongly recommend it to my listeners. I do a book club, and we might have to pick this up, although it might take a couple months for us, maybe 2 months, because it's so full of really wonderful references.
It's not a beach read, but one can also read it chapter by chapter, because each chapter focuses on a different person. And one of the things I enjoyed was traveling and asking each person what helped you, what nourishes you, what sustains you. And I think that's also a good question for readers of the book and for people listening. Like, what nourishes you? Where do you find peace? Where do you find joy? What's joyful for you? Because I think especially when things are challenging, we forget even to take a moment and appreciate things. We're so busy with whatever big problem is going on. We don't stop anymore to think about what nourishes us. How can I fill my own cup today before I go out and fill somebody else's?
Very important to the creative process. It really is. You can't always be taken out. You have to be taking back in. And sometimes that's just sitting on the beach, right?
Yeah.
So I appreciate you being on. Is there anything else you'd like to share about the book for someone?
I think it's a book. It's meant to give people courage. And what it's not meant to do is helping people to beat up on themselves. One thing that's interesting is, Richard Tedeschi told me he doesn't really introduce the term post-traumatic growth to his patients. He waits for patients, for his clients, to come to that insight themselves. And I think that's, I want to mention that also with the book. It's not about comparing yourself to others. It's about taking what's useful for you, find the parts that are inspiring for you. And one of the things I want to say is it's also about appreciation. And I appreciate the people who were courageous and open enough to share their journey with me. And I really do hope that this book inspires people. I've received some really heartwarming letters from people who've read the book and who found it helpful. And that's what keeps me going. If it helps even just one or two people, on their own journey, that's really why I wrote it. And for us to connect on that level, on that level of honesty and openness and non-judgment, that not being judgmental about what other people are going through. That's really what I'm trying to do with bouncing forward. And I appreciate your interview style, because I feel very much that you're doing that too. You have a very open-minded and non-judgmental interview style as well. So I really enjoyed being on your podcast and speaking with you.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed having you. And I was telling a mutual friend of ours, Wileen, I said, there's so much in here I could do other interviews. So I just picked, I wanted the listener to get the book. I wanted them to know your perspective, but there are so many wonderful stories in here, and perspectives and ways of thinking, so I did enjoy the book greatly. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, all right. Well, you have a great day, and I want to thank you again for being on the Spiritual Artist Podcast.
Thank you, Chris. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Whether you're following the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, make sure you choose the subscribe button so you'll receive new segments when they're released. Plus, check out my new book, The Spiritual Artist, now available on Amazon.com. In the meantime, be still, listen, and know that you are a spiritual artist.